Good evening, everyone. I'm Kathryn Graven, and I'm author of Memoirs of a Mask Maker. It's really fun to be at Kinokuniya bookstore. It's always been a happy place for me. When I was either a graduate student or working here in New York, I could pop into Kinokuniya and have a little mini break of Japanness without any jet lag. So the store in New York has always been kind of a special hideaway for me. I'm sure there's no video cam of me being here from way back then, but I really always enjoyed it. And in Tokyo, the Kinokuniya stores are just such a lovely place for foreigners to go to pop into, and you can grab some books on Japan in English and feel comforted, like, oh, there is a way to learn about this place. There's books here. And I think probably the same is true for Japanese people in New York. If they come to a Kinokuniya, they can come, and if there's Japanese, just being around Japanese and culture can kind of reinforce if they're feeling lonely here in New York. It's a kind of home away from home. So I've always just thought that Kinokuniya is a very special bookstore, has a very special place in the world of Japanese studies. And so I'm really grateful for you for having me here today, and especially to John for hosting this. It's great to be here, so thank you so much, John. When I left New York in 1986, I had been in graduate school here. I left to go back to Tokyo as a journalist on my first assignment. And I would say I hoped that a career in Tokyo would, shape my, give me a boost in my career, and it would lead to exciting things. But I never really thought about what going to Japan would do for me personally. How it might shape my life choices, my choices in partner, how I would raise my kids. I was young and ambitious and concerned about the journalism route. And what I've thought in the years since is, few foreign correspondents, when you go spend time in Japan, you're so busy chasing deadlines, you're so busy chasing stories, you're trying to figure it all out, that you don't really have a chance at that time to ask the question, so how is Japan affecting me? How is it shaping me as a person emotionally? And writing this book, Memoirs of a Mask Maker, I think was my opportunity to reflect on what Japan, the place, the people, the culture, meant to me in a very personal way. And so that's the story I'd like to talk about today. I think of it in terms of, for me, there were sort of Japan's unsung gifts. And I would call those, today the two things I'll talk about are masks and umeboshi. And those are like tangible things that Japan gave me. And Japan also gave me some intangibles. A feeling of emotional security and safety, and also a really important sense of belonging. And I came to appreciate how, in writing this book and thinking about it, how Japan actually saved me many times. And so I'd like to share a little bit of that story today. I'll read some excerpts from the book, and if we have any questions or time for discussion, we'll go for that. So when I first went to Japan, it was 1977, and I was escaping a difficult childhood in Minnesota. My mother had died tragically in a car accident when I was 5 years old. My father remarried quickly and basically denied my siblings and myself any chance to grieve our losses. Luckily, other women stepped in and became what I call other mothers, or what a Japanese friend of mine likes to call your heart mothers, which I kind of like heart mothers better than other mothers. And so I didn't know when I went to Japan as an AFS student when I was in high school that a Japanese woman would come to be one of my other mothers, but she did. So I also think in the Japanese studies world, among policymakers, academics, there's this sense that we all agree, and easily agree, that intercultural exchanges are a really good thing for kids, for young people, for the world, for international understanding, and people like to talk about that in a really broad sense. But what does that really mean, and how long does that last? And how do you measure that? Sometimes people say, well, there's an uptick in Japanese studies at the universities, or more people are studying Japan and China, and it's a big uptick, and yay, yay. And that's all great. But I think what my story suggests and says is that the full impact of cultural exchanges can be far greater and can last so much longer. So for nearly 4 decades, Japan has had a profound influence on my life, my career, and my worldview. I'll say it all started in a small town in Tochigi Prefecture called Otawarashi. And there, Katsu and Makoto Maniwa, my Japanese host parents, owned a family drugstore. And I used to love hanging out in the drugstore after school. And there I learned a lesson that proved so useful many decades later. So this is a little bit reading from the book. In early March 2020, as reports of a deadly virus in Asia dominated the news, I woke in the middle of the night, shaken by a dream so vivid, so clear, I had to sit up and get my bearings. I dreamed about masks. Kakuda-san, my trusty Japanese high school friend, arrived in front of the Maniwa drugstore wearing a white cloth mask over her face. I have a slight cold, she apologized. No problem, I said, knowing that wearing a mask is what Otosan and Okasan, my Japanese host parents, advised their drugstore customers to do. That's also what they did at home when they felt a cold coming on. Odaiji ni, I heard Okasan say in my dream to Kakuda-san as we walked down the street to school. Feel better, take care, stay well. All are fair translations for Odaiji ni. I got up thinking, I've got to figure out how to make masks. My dream and its call to action message was so clear, so powerful. I emailed a Japanese friend asking if she knew of any homemade mask patterns. The next day, Nahoko emailed me a popular pattern featured recently on an NHK broadcast. The instructions in Japanese included an easy-to-follow diagram. Pattern in hand, I rummaged through my fabric stashes and pulled out suitable cottons, linens, possibly some flannels, and spread them on the floor. I dragged my portable sewing machine out from the closet. I bought the lightweight cortina from my Tokyo flatmate at her sayonara sale almost 35 years earlier. I sewed hundreds of masks during the pandemic. I shared them with my neighbors, local postal workers, friends, family, and complete strangers across the US and overseas. I even mailed masks to Japan, and inside each mask, I signed my name and offered a sweet something, a dose of cheer. Sing, blow bubbles, smile, let's dance, time for a cookie. It was my pandemic odaiji ni, a little bow of gratitude to Okasan, my Japanese mother. So now I'd like to turn to just briefly another everyday Japanese item that continues to flavor my life, umeboshi. I love umeboshi. I love umeboshi. Do you know what umeboshi are? Yes. Gil? Okay, they're a little sour, tart, pickled Japanese plum. For reasons that go beyond their fleshy tartness, umeboshi, salted or pickled plums, gave me what many foreigners in Japan struggle to find, local acceptance. Umeboshi also continued to provide me with a tangible connection to Japan, all in one little tiny sour bite. Living with a Japanese pharmacist who specialized in kampo yaku, or ancient Chinese herbal medicines, often led to some interesting cultural clashes. When I had a slight cold or felt tired or under the weather, my Japanese host father dismissed my pleas for orange juice. He insisted on ginger drinks to warm my energy, and if I had an upset stomach, my go-to idea of plain toast was rejected in favor of okayu, bland rice porridge. Instead of a small white pill for a headache, Otosan offered some beige granules that made me gag. Luckily, we found common ground in umeboshi, and my host parents thought that I should eat an umeboshi a day. From the delicate dish on the breakfast table, the tiny, sassy, shriveled red pickles stared at me. Eat me. Given the surrounding neighbors, gooey fermented soybeans, minuscule dried silverfish with heads, shriveled bluish eggplant, shockingly yellow pickled daikon radishes, the umeboshi were probably justified in their poise. I lifted one as gracefully as possible with my chopsticks and plopped it in my mouth. Otosan, Okasan, and Obachan watched my face. Nothing in my dill pickle sauerkraut childhood had prepared me for the taste of this tart, tiny, salted pickled plum. I grimaced. I puckered my cheeks. Yappari suppai desu ne, Okasan said. Yappari suppai desu, I agreed. Yes, it's a bit sour. I tried whatever kind of umeboshi the manhwa served, from the tiny, super dry tart ones to the semi-sweet, big, fleshy ones. To everyone's amazement, I handled them all. And in a bizarre Japanese logic applied to foreigners who actually liked Japanese food, that was practically grounds for making me an honorary Japanese. After Okasan noticed that I didn't just pick at the umeboshi in the morning, but like them, they started appearing on the top of my rice in my obento, or lunchbox. She was trying to please me. What she didn't know was that the umeboshi actually saved me in homeroom. Every day, as we unwrapped our lunches at school, my Japanese classmates couldn't help but glance over and stare at my obento. I'm not sure what alien dragons they expected to fly out, but when they saw that my lunch of minced ground pork meat, runny scrambled eggs, sliced cucumbers, and maybe a stewed carrot, all on top of a bed of rice, looked just like their lunches, they were stunned. The umeboshi on top sealed the deal. During lunch, for at least 30 minutes, I fit in. I had what everyone else had. A Japanese mother who lovingly and artfully prepared my obento. I still love umeboshi. My sons, who were born and raised in Boston, endured, much to their chagrin, similar stares from their classmates because I sent them on field trips or class picnics with Japanese onigiri rice balls filled with umeboshi for their lunches. The importance of umeboshi runs far deeper for me, and it may be hard to imagine just why it was so revolutionary for me. A girl from Minnesota who grew up in a motherless household. I now had an experience of having a mother notice my likes and my dislikes and prepare a lunch for me, garnished with my favorite umeboshi. After that, I started to experience similar feelings of acceptance in my daily Japanese life, with something as simple as everyday greetings. Back in Minnesota, I came home from school to a large, empty house. I had a sense of doom that people left and didn't return. My mother died. My older siblings went off to college, leaving me to live alone with my father and in charge of all the household duties. My Japanese family couldn't have been more different. Surrounded by the busyness of the drugstore, I was never by myself. From this small house, I watched Japanese society unfold. I was in the thick of it, confused at times, but challenged, awakened to new ways of being. As my Japanese improved, I noticed how extra polite Okasan was to older customers, how her verb endings changed when she talked to her close friends or younger customers. Eventually, I learned to distinguish between different employees' voices by their irashaimase calls when customers entered and their arigatou gozaimashitas when customers left. Bowing, thank you. Bowing, goodbye. Long, low bows outside on the street until the customers drove away. There were endless bowing nuances to absorb. Would I ever get it right? More deeply, with the drugstore, came something I craved. A steady sense of coming and going. Okasan sent me off to school with a wave and a bow. Gambatte Keshi-chan, good luck, try hard. Itikimasu, I'm off, I said, ducking under the storefront shutter. When I arrived home and declared, Tadaima, I have returned, she and the other employees chimed in with happy strains of Okaeri nasai, welcome back. You leave. Your leaving is acknowledged and encouraged. You come back and you are received home. Those everyday greetings are one of the things I think I miss most about Japan. When you're back here in America, it's kind of hard to say like, oh, hi, honey, I'm home, or hi, here I am. There's a special nuance, a special something around these everyday Japanese greetings. I have to say I miss when I'm not there. And so I think ever since then I've taken those greetings, that sense of belonging, to heart, and I have felt free to come and go to Japan as an intimate member of a Japanese family. In other words, my 1 year as an exchange student to a Japanese girls' high school wasn't a one-off event. But with this connection also came some very difficult family obligations. These two I would list as unexpected gifts. Years later, after I'd married and moved to Boston, my host sister Toshie called, wondering if I could possibly come back to Otawara. Both my Japanese parents had cancer that nobody was talking about, except now they were talking about it. We are all taking turns going to the hospital and making food. We think you should take your turn, Toshie said on behalf of the other sisters. Of course. Mostly it annoys me when people act out of obligation. But in this case, I felt so proud to be considered enough of a daughter that it didn't feel like any obligation to drop everything and spend 2 weeks in Otawara, the town surrounded by summer's luscious green rice fields. Otosan, or father, was happy when I showed up with mail from home, fresh laundry, and a Kathy-cooked meal. He bragged to the nurses about his daughter's cooking skills, and I watched the confused look on their faces. Yes, this is Keshi. She's our 4th daughter. Yonbanbe no musume desu. I loved being called 4th daughter. Osewa ni narimashita, I said with a bow and a slight smile. I'm indebted to you for your care. Back at the house, I helped with shopping, laundry, chores, cleaning, anything the sisters needed. Again, I didn't feel like an outsider. The Maniwas treated me as a daughter, a sister. I thank them for allowing me inside the family at its hardest, most vulnerable time. 2 parents straddling life and death on the rim of a teacup. I felt at home, strangely safe, even as the teacup was about to tip over. My Japanese parents died with less than 3 months apart, but the story doesn't end there. Their impact on my life is ongoing. I still pack umeboshi on all our family trips. During the early days of the pandemic, I shipped masks to my host sisters, and over the years, I've shared many meals with them sitting under the kotatsu in Otawara. We visit the family grave together and mark special events like the Jusan Kaiki and other important events in the Buddhist calendar. My connection to the family extends to the next generation of Japanese, the next generation with my Japanese nieces and nephews coming and going to Boston. They've learned about their grandparents through my eyes and memories, and through this book. So one of the reasons I share this story with people who have been to Japan, not been to Japan, or wanted to tell this book is, to stop and think for a minute how another place, another culture affects you. And what is it giving you? How is it helping you become a better person, a better friend, walk in the world in a different way? And I'm also sharing my story. I want Japanese people to read it and see it as well, because I want them to see that when foreigners go to Japan, they can have a profound influence, and that when foreigners leave Japan, they can take bits of Japan with them. And with any luck, they can integrate it and make it part of their lives and make the world a bit larger and wider and more open. So that's why I've shared my story, Memoirs of a Masquerader. I've really focused on today the Japanese part of the story because we're here at Kinokuniya. But there are many other things one could discuss or not. Anyway, I'm happy for the new people that walked in. Lovely friends who I haven't seen in many, many years, so welcome. Welcome. And anyway, I'm open to any comments or suggestions. Since this is a book talk and I guess you're supposed to do this, I'd love to have you follow me on Instagram. It's Kathryn Graven Author, and visit my website. If you want to see some really crazy pictures of me when I was 16 and living in the Japanese drugstore, you have to visit the website. They're not in the book. So I'll end my talk at this point and take it from there. Thanks so much for listening. John?
Yeah, so you discussed your Japanese mother. There are two other women who are important?
Yes, so the book Memoirs is really about my other mothers, heart mothers, and I would say it's the story of four women. The first is my paternal grandmother, Kathryn Graven. She was my father's mother, and she was the woman who taught me how to sew. And she was a force of nature, lived to be 94, but she really stepped in after my mother died, and she was the grandmother who said, okay, you're going to have to learn to cook and sew and run a house, and you're not going to have a mother. And oh, by the way, you're going to learn all that, and then you're going to get out of here. You need to go places and see the world. So Helen Davis, my Gram, as she's the character in the book, was a really important mother. And the next was my next door neighbor, my best friend, Christy. Lived next door to me in Minneapolis, where I grew up. And her mother was Phyllis. And Phyllis was also a lovely force of nature. She was raising 4 kids, and her husband was Warren, was a Lutheran pastor, very kind of progressive liberal guy in the 1960s and 70s in Minneapolis. And their house was kind of right behind our house, separated by an alley. And I used to just walk, across, but behind the alley in our pajamas. I mean, Christy and I would go back and forth. And anyway, Phyllis knew that I had a kind of crazy family situation in my house, and she just opened the door and always welcomed me in. And she was also a sewer, and we shared for many years a passion for sewing and fabrics and all kinds of, we'd get together and we just would talk and blab and sew. So she's another woman, other mother in the story. So there's Helen, there's Phyllis, there's Katsu, my Japanese mother. And then, of course, the story gets into my biological mother, who was Arlene Lindholm Graven. She died in a car accident when she was 36. So I never really knew her. But I think part of this book is a way of these other women, knowing them, seeing how they raised their kids, mentored other kids, sort of gave me permission to dig in and try to discover who my own mother was. And so kind of in the latter part of the book, we dive into what's it like as an adult to try to piece together an early childhood loss. So those are the 4 women. I mean, there's other women that kind of peek in and out. But I think one of the reasons I wanted to do this book was because none of the women, and myself, I mean, we're not famous. I'm not famous. I have no tricks for how to get rich, and I haven't had any crazy addictions. I have no reason to be a celebrity of anything. And each of the women that stepped in to help me were they were extraordinary women, but they wouldn't be what you'd call celebrity anything or special anything. My Japanese mother was a working pharmacist. Phyllis was the next door neighbor raising 4 kids. My grandmother, had raised 3 sons and 13 grandkids in a small town in Iowa. And I think the point of the story is really that when there's brokenness, help can come from the simplest places, within the family, maybe next door, and maybe across the world. And the idea that we might be closing doors or shutting off relations with places, I mean, what if that was the place that was going to be your help place? You know, that would be terrible. So I wanted to tell the story to really honor these women who have kind of been unsung heroes. And I think that's true in a lot of communities still today, that some of the people offering the help to young kids who are suffering from loss they're not heroes in the sense. They just day in and day out, you know, kind of look after you and wonder if there's something that they could do. Phyllis used to take me to the doctor. I mean, my dad was working full time. I mean, if I got sick at school, she was the call person that would come and, you know, pick me up, or crazy stuff happened, she'd be the one that would have to go tell my dad, okay, Kathy, this happened to Kathy, like, okay, how are we going to sort this out? So, you know, every day, and she always, Phyllis, my friend's mother, was very, you know, open door. If you need anything, I'm here, kind of thing. I mean, I went on family vacations with this family. They became a whole set of siblings. And it's kind of weird because I have my Japanese siblings, and I have the Phyllis's kids, who were my other set of siblings. I also have my biological siblings. And so part of the story is that I wanted to sort of sort out is how is it to be going in and out of various families? How do we maneuver between our chosen families, our biological families, and other places where we feel safe? How does one navigate that? It's not without its pitfalls. It's not without its... I mean, I think the good thing I could say is if you want to choose a family on the other side of the world, they don't really mix with the one back here. So you get a little bit of a buffer there. That was quite good. I mean, none of my Japanese, none of the siblings have met each other. But I'm an intimate part of 3 families. We've all been at the same birthday party or wedding or event, and everybody leaves and says, wow, you know, it was great. The cocktails were excellent. The food was excellent. The dancing was excellent. We were all at the same thing, but we didn't experience it the same way. And that's what I think of memoir. It's not, I really said, I'm not trying to tell your story. I don't know how you felt about our mother dying. I don't know how you felt about certain things that our father did. I'm only telling my story. If I veered out of that lane, let me know. If there's anything that's factually incorrect, please let me know. If you have a different story to tell, please go tell it. But this is mine. And I think memoirists have to be very clear what they're writing. I mean, if you take liberties and it's a novel, then don't call it a memoir, because that's a fictionalized version of something. But it is what I remember about family events. And I hope, and I ask them all, if you read this and you think I've told your story, then that's fair game. I'll discuss. If you read this and, you know, there's a famous quote by Anne Lamott that says if you write about somebody and they don't like it, you know, you can tell them, well, you should have been nicer to me. Like, you know, if you don't like what I have to say, you should have been nicer, you had your chance. So, but honestly, the point of the book was never to reveal anything about their lives and how any of the events that happened in the book affected them. It was really about me. And I think that all the people who read it felt, well, if they had a disagreement about that, they didn't express it, and they were all very supportive of coming out with the book and sharing the family stories. And yeah, we're all still talking, you know, like there's no, but but at the same time, it is raw for family members, and it's difficult for people to read about them in somebody else's book. if you're in somebody else's book, that's kind of odd because you don't control it. But again, what I've encouraged, if anybody feels that way, then please go write your own story. I mean, that's the whole point of telling your story in a memoir, is to say, let's have any story come out. Any story's worthy, if it can help you or shine light on something or just make you feel at peace, or I don't know, whatever reasons people have for sharing their stories. That's a really important thing to do. But you really do have to be clear. And there was some moments when I sent out the letter and the manuscript to each of them and explained my party scenario. Like, we're all at the same party, but we have different memories. So I honor your memories and feel free to write. I didn't know how that was going to land. There's some time where you don't know how that's going. Yeah, a little anxiety there. Lisa, oh my gosh, so nice to see you. Thank you for coming.
I have a question about your process.
Yes.
Did you envision the structure the way from the beginning, and that's how it played out? And how many revisions did you guys have to do, and like rewriting and changing how you envision the tell the whole story?
Okay, so the question is the structure of the book how I envisioned it, and how many rewrites and all of that was involved. I could lie and say, oh sure, I had it all figured out, and it just poured right out. A big lie. That didn't happen. So it's funny, and I think Stephen read an earlier version of the book, and at one point the book was called My Four Mothers, and then I sent it out to agents and various places, and they were like, nobody wants to read about mothers. And then they said, Four Mothers, what, you had two lesbian couples as your parents? I mean, everything just kind of, like, they didn't like that title. So that was a bit of a problem. And I stuck with that. And then the book I was having trouble finding agents and publishers, and I had an agent in Japan, and then he kind of ghosted me during COVID. So I had to start all over. And then I thought, okay, should I just shove the book away? It's not happening. That was after many revisions, and I thought, oh, I finally had it. And the revision process, I say, is very, it's very fraught. It's like the last one in scenario. Like, somebody reads it and they say, well, I think you should do this, 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 and you think, okay, I could try this, this, and that. And the next person undoes that and says, do this, this, this. Pretty soon, you're back to square one, which says, this is my book, I have to tell it in a way that makes sense for me and how I want to do it. And I really can't listen to all these people who are very nice friends and well-meaning people and all of that. But no, that's a ticket to nowhere. And then, as luck would have it, I tore my right shoulder and I needed rotator cuff repair surgery during COVID, which I had. And so it was COVID, and I'm lying in bed with my right arm, and I'm right-handed in a sling, and I can't. But I thought, okay, I'm gonna look through this manuscript now one more time and see, like, what can I do? How can I reshape it? Talking about, I don't know, endless reshaping. And at that time, and I was using, I couldn't type because the arm, so it was sheets. Anyway, the dog jumped on the bed, and the manuscript went like this, all over the floor. And I just sat there, and I was like, I wanted to cry. I thought, this is a low, could be a low. And then I thought, no, this is perfect. And I told my husband, don't move the papers. They're all scattered around the room. They're a complete mess. We're leaving it that way. And it was a little bit like unraveling the whole manuscript. But during that time when it was all unraveled and scattered, physically scattered across the floor of the room with the dog anyway, I woke up like 2 days later and I said, okay, I think I have it. I have managed to write a whole book. What came to me was that I had written a whole book about pulling together a life. And I've done all these things. I was an artist, I was a journalist, I was whatever. But the one thing that really gives me the most comfort, and when I'm panicked, that I do is I sew. I've written a whole book, and I haven't mentioned sewing. How is that possible? You think you write a whole memoir, you have dumped your life. but I didn't discuss sewing. So I had this idea like, okay, what, I'm an artist, I'm a this, I'm a that, what am I, moment. And I said, oh, I'm a mask maker. It was COVID, I had been sewing masks, I'm a mask maker. And at that moment I thought, okay, this is it. Sewing is what really had connected me to all these women in various ways. And literally kind of fabric in a way, but sewing, how to take a moment and make it into something else. And once I had that idea of claiming I was a mask maker, it only took I rewrote the beginning and rewrote the end, and the whole middle fit together. So, PSS later, in one of the reviews that came out late that somebody wrote, they wrote, I really like this book, it was very meaningful, blah, blah, very emotional. It's about these 4 women. I don't know why this woman didn't call her book My 4 Mothers. The mask maker thing is really annoying. And I thought, okay, well, there you go. This is ridiculous. I mean, you can't listen to people. Anyway, and I had a lot of pushback from some of my readers early on, like, why are you calling this book Memoirs of a Mask Maker? I mean, it's during COVID. But, that's a little bit dicey. COVID's got to end, and everybody wants to forget about this. And I kind of sat with it, and I said, no, yes, COVID will be over. We're not wearing masks tonight. It's all kind of different. But for me, the book, the kind of essence of the book is that when there was a crisis, when there was this panic, I had what I needed already from all these women who would help me. And I was able to share that with others in the form of making masks. And I wanted to be proud of that. And so when I said that to one guy who's a very famous poet who had helped me on some parts of the book, he's like, okay, I'm convinced, you can keep the title. I'm like, thanks, it's my book anyway. But it is, it's a bit risky. And I've given talks about naming your book, which is, honestly, if any of you are writing a book, don't share it with people. It's a little bit like having a baby. Don't tell your friends the name, and just name the baby, and then they have to accept Ebenezer or, like it's Pollyanna, whatever you want to, it's your choice. So you stick with your choice. But the reason I stayed with Memoirs of a Mask Maker really was because I did feel it was an important way that tied these women together. And I feel I am a sewer, and I am someone who stitches things and holds things together. And it's not an easy thing to do in this crazy world. So, I don't know. Does that answer the question? Yes. Anyway, I can't actually tell you how many writes and rewrites I have, and that's a whole other process. But it's important in the process to, talk to people, share with people, but at the same time, it has to be your, it's my book, it's my name on it, I'm the one that gets to be embarrassed or not about it, or whatever I'm the one behind it. So you have to sit with that. But really, that one review when the lady said the title of the book should have been the old title, I was like, okay, you can't win, we can't win. Anyway, I don't know, Kumiko, did you have any comment about writing, rewriting, and more writing? Kumiko's also a wonderful author.
I can't remember the number of times I rewrote until I finally realized I was just rewriting in circles.
Yeah.
So I had to stop.
Yeah, there's that. It's a little bit like painting. I also do a lot of painting, and one of the first questions when you're kind of working on a painting or starting is like, how do you know when it's done? Like, when is the painting done? Can you overpaint? You can definitely overpaint. It's like, overcooking your muffins. I mean, there's overdoing, there's underdoing. How do you know? And I think writing is like that too. You reach a point, and if you are starting to go in circles, it's nice to have a trusted reader or somebody who can maybe say, okay, now it's the time to put it down and see where it goes from here, right? So, yeah. Yes, John.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about doing journalism in Japan? And did you cover any interesting stories that were notable to you?
Oh, thank you. Okay, the question is journalism in Japan and any notable stories. Some of the people here are my journalism colleagues from Tokyo, so that's an interesting question. Yeah, I loved being a journalist in Japan. I think I loved the time when we were journalists in Japan. Japan was really booming. This was kind of the whole bubble. I think one of the stories I did that was most memorable for me and landed quite well at the Journal was it wound up as a page one story. It was about, I interviewed and spent a lot of time with wives of famous Japanese executives. And I had this idea that back in the day, everybody was buying the idea that, the men worked hard and had lifetime security and the women were all fine with that because that was what the men were supposed to do. And I thought, okay, now Japan has a certain measure of success. Was it worth it? Did the women think it was worth it to not have had a life with their husbands? Or what was that like? So the Journal actually was quite good at the time. They gave me, amazing. We had what's the polling? We did a survey. They paid for a survey of executive wives, and I got to spend some time with Akio Morita's wife and some other famous people about what they thought about their husbands, which was a very kind of intimate look into corporate Japanese life. And now we think, well, that's such a dated idea. Talk to the wives of the executives. I mean, the women should be the executives, and I don't know what the men are doing, kind of. But back in the mid-'80s, talking to the wives about what they thought about their husbands' careers, my bureau chief was like, really? Who would care? I'm like, oh, man. And we're among friends here, so we could say. I mean, these people should have a voice. The women should have a voice in what was corporate Japan's success all about if the families were a mess. So I was very proud of that story. It landed very well. It was well placed and well remembered, and I think it was one of the early days of me searching and trying to find the voice of women amidst all the other kind of stories that were out there about Japan's success. And I'd love to see it, and I'd love to do it again 40 years later, but I mean, things have changed, and the world is changing. But it was definitely a timepiece. But I think it was part of my early days as trying to find my own voice and understand women in society and their roles. And I wouldn't have articulated it in the way that I can now, having written a book and written about women and the women important to me in ways that resonate with me. But I liked that one. I also had some fun ones. I loved one of my favorites that my family likes. I did a very early story on the first Japanese group that was going to sail a boat in the America's Cup. And I had read about this, and so, my family laughs. I took one physics class in undergraduate. It was called The Physics of Sailing. You count it as a science credit at Stanford, believe it or not. Anyway, the goal was to go sailing in San Francisco Bay every Saturday with the professor who lived in the dorm. And so every Saturday we would go out to San Francisco Bay, and every Saturday I would throw up over the boat. It was like you go under the Golden Gate Bridge, and it's really narrows, and it's it's rough. Anyway, so I had this. I've always kind of had an interest in sailing. So I heard this Japanese group was going to do a boat in the America's Cup, and so I proposed to go down and watch them practice and write a story about the first Japanese. I mean, they're an island nation. Where's the sailing teams? What's going on with sailing here? And I thought that was okay, it was a bit of a junket. It went as an A-head. But I went and hung out with the Japanese sailing team, which, it turned out, was populated by people from New Zealand. And I went out on some of these yachts, wherever they were doing, and I wrote this story, and the headline was something like Japanese sailors need Pepto-Bismol. I mean, it was kind of a mess of a sailing story. But another journalist in Tokyo picked up on it and wrote a bigger story for the New Yorker on it, and then proceeded to go write a book about it, which I thought, wow, I missed my calling. And my physics of sailing could only take me so far. But I love that story because it kind of tied some of my earlier interests that I didn't ever think would come in handy. But, the physics of sailing freshman seminar carried me sailing with the Japanese first team. It's an interesting, I mean, does anybody have, are you a sailor? Anybody a sailor here? Like, Japan's an island nation. There's so many sailing opportunities, but you know, we don't think of that. So, anyway, sorry, that was a little on the lighter side of things. I did also cover stock markets and financial markets and auto factories and other things, which, you know, is now looking back was great fun. Any other? No, we've exhausted it all.
All right, let's give it a hand for Kathryn Graven.